This is Maribel Ramos' apartment where she was last seen 8 days ago. Her family says she left behind her much-loved dog, she left behind her vehicle, and there's been no recent activity on her cell phone or credit cards.
When 36-year-old Army veteran Maribel Ramos didn't show up to her softball game on the 3rd of May 2013, her family immediately began to worry.
She does not just not call and or not show up. You know, if she has a commitment with you, she will be there.
Her roommate Casey Joy had also reported her missing at around 10:40 a.m., saying that she had not come home that previous night.
Orange Police Dispatcher Rose.
Oh, this is not an emergency, and I have a roommate. She's 36 years old, and she didn't come home last night.
Her family made several attempts to contact her, but when this failed, they immediately sprung into action and started searching for her.
Our family desperately needs the community to come together so we can find Maribel Ramos, my sister, their cousin, the aunt, the student, the veteran, the amazing woman that gives and has changed other people's lives.
They scoured the city for any trace of her, but sadly, in a horrifying twist of events, about 2 weeks after her disappearance, Maribel's lifeless body was discovered. The search for Maribel's murderer quickly led them to someone who had been close to her, someone she once called a friend. This is the tragic story of Maribel's murder and what happens when attraction turns to jealousy and obsession. Maribel Manriquez Ramos was a Hispanic woman from Mexico who was born on the 22nd of November 1976. She had a deep love for her family and was said to have always had her sights set on a future with a happy home and a family of her own. Her family would describe her as an inspirational, compassionate and fun to be around woman who always thought about the future and someone who was a great human. In the year 2000, she joined the US Army to serve her country, and after 9/11, she was deployed to South Korea and Iraq, where she courageously fought until she was honorably discharged in 2008. Maribel was said to be a highly organized person who set goals for herself, so after leaving the Army, she was determined to get a degree in criminal justice and to one day become a police officer. She moved to Orange County and attended California State University, where she shared an apartment with her mother at 16A 168 East Rose Avenue, Santa Ana. Sadly, however, shortly after moving to Orange County, her mother fell critically ill and died the following year in 2009. Maribel was of course left devastated, and she now had to find someone to come and live with her, as her bills were too much for her to handle alone as she was a student. Maribel therefore asked her sister, Lucero, to move in with her, but her sister said no, as Lucero had a daughter and was already settled in, so she suggested Maribel find a roommate instead. Maribel agreed and decided to send out a roommate ad on Craigslist. 55-year-old Kwang Choi Joy, better known as Casey Joy, responded to the ad. He was a Korean man who claimed to be from Knoxville, Tennessee, looking for an apartment in Orange County or the Huntington Beach area. He claimed to have been recently laid off from his job and was applying for a job in the Huntington Beach area, so he needed an apartment whilst he was in town. He said he had enough savings to keep him going for a while, and that rent would be paid on time. In his message responding to Maribel's ad, he wrote, "I am a Korean single professional male. I am looking for a small apartment or private room with kitchen use, and your place sounds perfect. I have a 10-pound dog, Yorkie. I am a social drinker, non-smoker, straight, and I like to keep things clean. I am easygoing and get along with most people." When Casey came to the area for his job interview, he decided to also come and check out the apartment, and that's when Maribel and her sister met Casey Joy for the first time. On meeting Casey, Lucero had thought he was a nice older man. He had told her that he had never been married and was neither a father nor liked bringing people to the house. After chatting extensively with him, Lucero liked him and believed him to be a perfect fit for a roommate for her sister, since he sounded mature and didn't seem like he would be a distraction to Maribel, who at the time was focused on her studies. Maribel was also happy with Casey, so she accepted his request, and Casey soon moved in with her. A few months into living together, Maribel noticed that Casey was always indoors and kept to himself. Being the kind person she was, Maribel decided to start a friendship with him and started inviting him to social events with her. She was very social and had friends and family around Orange County, so she regularly had activities to attend. She would then invite him to things with her and introduce him to her friends and family. From there, they slowly became friends, and he became happier and more social, even calling her his best friend. Things, however, would take a sinister, dark turn as time progressed, when Casey confessed his feelings of love towards Maribel in the summer of 2013. On one fateful day, Casey opened up to Maribel about his deep romantic feelings for her. Despite being almost 20 years older than she was, he had hoped he could start a family with her. He enjoyed hanging out with her friends and family and felt welcomed, giving him the hope that he might someday have a future with her and provide for her. Unfortunately, however, Maribel didn't feel the same way about him. She had always seen Casey as a friend. She cared for him but had no romantic feelings for him. She was also already dating a man called Paul Lopez, so she politely rejected his romantic offer and told him she didn't feel the same way towards him. Casey was immediately angered by her rejection. He wanted her badly and decided to try talking to her sister, as he believed Lucero liked him and would try and convince Maribel to be with him. However, he got quite the opposite response from Maribel's sister. Lucero was shocked about his confession, and rather than helping him, she instantly told him off, citing the age difference and that he wasn't the kind of man her sister wanted and that her sister would never like him like that. Lucero's words further angered Casey, and he became more furious. She, however, persuaded her sister to amicably talk to Casey about the issue and to try and find a way to move forwards. After Maribel spoke with Casey, they settled that they would continue being friends, and Casey reassured her that he accepted her decision and that it was a one-time crush, so it wouldn't be much of an issue or affect their friendship. Maribel felt at peace again with this reassurance, and they put things behind them and tried to continue as normal. As days went by and weeks passed, however, Maribel started feeling like something was wrong, and she noticed some strange changes in Casey's behavior. First, he came home one night with a huge giant Bengal tiger tattoo, after she had told him she thought he would look good with tattoos. The next day, she noticed that he changed his dressing style and started dressing like a younger guy. At first, she thought it was a good change and admired it, but not until one evening when Casey returned home with bandages all over his face. She asked him if he had been involved in a fight or an accident, but later found out that he had undergone a $12,000 facial surgery to make his face look younger. Maribel then confided in her sister, saying she was scared about how far he was willing to go to make himself more appealing, and that she started feeling extremely uncomfortable. Meanwhile, at the time, Casey didn't have a job, so he couldn't afford to pay his rent. Maribel could not afford to pay for the place on her own, and with things getting worse between them, she asked him to move out. But Casey refused. He was in love with Maribel, and moving out of the apartment meant he wouldn't have access to her anymore. On the 21st of April 2013, Maribel reminded Casey about his rent and that if he didn't have it by the end of the month, he should move out. Casey was offended by her statement and became angry, so he threatened to harm her, even boasting of his black belt martial art holder title. Maribel had never seen this side to him, and she became terribly frightened, so she dialed 911 to report that she was afraid and might act in self-defense if he attempted to harm her.
Hi, Orange Police. Okay, well, I just want to let you know that I have a roommate that should be leaving at the end of the month. We had a conversation today that he kind of freaked me out. I'm not feeling comfortable around him anymore. I'm feeling threatened.
What's your name?
My name is Maribel. My name is...
What's your last name, Maribel?
Ramos. R-A-M-O-S.
Okay.
At the end of the month, I want him to leave, and from now until then, I just feel like I have to lock my door, which I will, because he sounded like he would hurt me. Like, it was weird.
Why are you crying?
Because I'm afraid.
What? Your roommate?
I'm not comfortable with him anymore. I'm just, like, calling so that you guys know that if something happens, that I did it because I was trying to defend myself.
That night, following the call, she slept in her room with the doors locked. The following day, a police officer stopped by the house to follow up the emergency call, and he questioned Maribel and Casey about the incident. However, when questioned, Maribel didn't inform the officer enough to conclude she was in danger. She did, however, want the officer to get an official statement from Casey that he would move out of the apartment by the end of the month, which he gave to the officer. The days that followed were absolute hell for Maribel. She cried to sleep, became scared, and always locked her door, afraid for her life. On the evening of the 2nd of May 2013, at around 7:50 p.m, Maribel went to deposit her rent check for the month in the drop box in the apartment complex. Casey, however, had refused to move out, even after providing the official statement to the police. Angered by this, she reminded him of his agreement to move out by the end of the previous month, which he had not honoured. However, Casey became angry and they got into another argument. He became so agitated that he cursed at her, and she started crying and called her boyfriend, Paul Lopez, to report the incident to him. Instantly, Paul became worried and asked her to put the phone on loudspeaker so he could speak to Casey. Paul warned Casey to move out the next day, threatening to throw out his things if he disobeyed. Still worried about the incident, Paul asked Maribel if he should come over to her house, but Maribel felt she had everything under control, so she reassured him that she would be okay, and that she would see him at the softball game the following evening as planned. She then went to her room to go to sleep. Sadly, however, Casey's anger and rage boiled over that evening. He could not deal with the rejection and the thought of moving out and no longer being around Maribel, and so, if he couldn't have her, no one could. Maribel played softball with her friends and family every Friday evening, but on the Friday of the 3rd of May 2013, Maribel was missing from the game. The previous night, she had promised her boyfriend Paul Lopez that she would attend the game as planned, yet there was no sign of her. After speaking with Maribel on the phone the previous night, Paul had texted her, but she never responded. He had also tried contacting her earlier that morning, but she also never responded. Hoping she would still honour her words by coming to the softball game, he didn't think too much of it in the moment. Meanwhile, Maribel's aunt became worried and called Lucero, reporting Maribel's disappearance and asking if she was with her sister. But earlier that morning, Lucero had received a text from Casey Joy, who had expressed his concerns for Maribel's whereabouts, as apparently she had yet to come home. He also mentioned that he tried to file a police report, but the police told him that it was too soon.
Police dispatcher Rose.
Oh, this is not an emergency, and I have a roommate. She's 36 years old, and she didn't come home last night.
Despite Casey's claims, Lucero had brushed off his concerns because of her suspicions about Casey's true motives. She thought that Casey was just trying to get involved, and that if Maribel hadn't spent the night in her flat, then it wasn't any of Casey's business. However, she still had a slight uneasy feeling after the conversation and texted Maribel saying Happy Friday. She never got a response from Maribel, however, so she guessed her sister was busy and brushed off any terrifying thoughts, as she was sure her sister was okay. But on getting the call from her aunt about Maribel's absence from the softball game, this was now one step too far. Lucero became extremely worried, as Maribel was an organised person who always honoured her words and loved going to the softball game. So her family immediately tried to call her several times, but they didn't get a response, so they went directly to her residence to look for her. On getting to her house, they noticed that her car was parked outside the house, but no one was answering the door. After knocking tirelessly for hours, they attempted to call Casey, but he refused to pick up his calls. They also called her workplace and friends to confirm if she was there, but no one knew her whereabouts. As hours passed, they became more and more worried and feared that maybe she had died in her sleep. Immediately, her family phoned the police and let them know their thoughts. When the police arrived, her door was forced open, and on getting inside, her family noticed that her room lights were on, and her bed was unmade, which was extremely out of character for Maribel, who was always organised and tidy. Meanwhile, Casey was yet to return home that evening. The police had also attempted to call Casey before attempting to break into Maribel's house. However, he neither picked up their calls nor returned any. It would later be discovered that Casey had been sitting in his car outside the apartment watching the police with binoculars before eventually walking up to the officers to casually inquire about what had happened that prompted their arrival.
I want to see who's going to knock on my door. Park the car in the front. I took my notebook, had a binocular in there.
You were doing your own surveillance?
Yes.
Meanwhile, as more hours passed, her family went to the park, her workplace, and nearby areas to look for her, but she was nowhere to be found. The next day, the police immediately put out a search for her, with every newspaper, news channel, and magazine reporting her disappearance.
An Army veteran and Orange County student has disappeared, and now police want to know what happened to Maribel Ramos.
Right now, there are very few clues as to what happened to her, but police are saying her disappearance is considered suspicious.
This is Maribel Ramos' neighborhood, where she was last seen sometime Thursday night between 7:30 and 8:30 p.m. It's one of the details listed on this flyer that family and friends are passing out as we speak, hoping that someone saw something.
The police found the CCTV cameras that showed Maribel at 7:50 p.m. on the evening of the 2nd of May, dropping off her rent check at the apartment complex. This was the last known sighting of her. Checking for more clues, the police returned to her house, but sadly, they found no vital information to the investigation, so they began to interview her friends, family, and colleagues. During the interviews, her boyfriend Paul Lopez told them he had last spoken to Maribel before she went to bed. He added that Maribel had called him to let him know that she was having a disagreement with Casey. He also said that he had asked Casey to move out the next day. Despite Paul's helpful information, everyone else had neither spoken to nor seen Maribel, and they all had alibis, except for one person, Casey Joy. As Casey was also suspected to be the last person to have seen Maribel, he quickly became a suspect, and they brought him in for questioning. At the police station, he revealed that they had had a fight that previous night over his failure to move out because he couldn't pay his rent. He also revealed that she had called her boyfriend Paul, who had spoken to him over her phone, asking him to move out the next day before she retreated to bed, making him the last person to have seen her. During his questioning, the police also noticed that Casey had fresh bruises and scratches all over his body. When asked about the injuries, he claims to have sustained them whilst pulling fishing lines in the park.
How'd you get all these scratches on you?
We go to Eisenhower Park all the time.
Uh-huh.
You go exactly, we pick up other ponds, we pick up fishing lines all the time. You go there, fishing lines.
Those are from fishing?
No, I'm ready to explain.
Though these injuries were suspicious, with no concrete evidence that he was involved with her disappearance, the police had no choice but to let him go. A few days into the investigation, the police were told by the neighbours that ever since the investigation started, Casey was speaking really bad English. Some felt he was trying to pull the immigrant non-English sorry vibe. Maribel's family had also begun to suspect that he was involved in Maribel's disappearance, as he had started acting differently. Prior to her disappearance, Casey was always warm to the family and acted like he cared. But during the search, he stayed away from them and barely spoke to them. This, coupled with the fact that they knew Casey had confessed his feelings to Maribel and that he had begun to act slightly obsessive, they had every reason to believe he had harmed Maribel. So they kept asking the police to look more into him. As the police looked for more evidence, they searched their records for clues that could possibly lead to Maribel's whereabouts. While searching their records, they discovered the 911 call she had made 2 weeks earlier, reporting Casey and how she was frightened about what he might do to her. However, they discovered that Maribel refused to make an official report when asked by the officer who stopped by to follow through her 911 call. Meanwhile, the Ramos family kept searching for Maribel, hoping she would return home safely. They opened a missing persons account on Facebook and Yelp, made flyers with her photo, and asked people to contact them if they saw her or had any information about her whereabouts. The search for Maribel became so big that the Army, Marine, her workplace, and school also assisted in searching for her. On the 13th of May 2013, 9 days after her disappearance, a candlelit vigil was held by her family to support each other, and they hoped that people would interact with them and maybe come forward with any vital information. Amongst the several attendees was Casey Joy, but although he attended, he never participated. He just stood in the background, hidden. He claimed to have acted that way because of his profound sadness at the time and said he couldn't be around her family. Several days passed and still Maribel was yet to return home. However, some days after the vigil, Casey posted on Maribel's missing person Yelp account, speaking of Maribel in the past tense. He posted, "I am Maribel's roommate. She is my BFF and my only family. She is absolutely the best woman I ever met. We had so much fun together. I miss her so much. She always knew that I would give my life for her without hesitation." His use of past tense immediately aroused suspicion, causing another user to comment, saying, "Am I the only one finding it odd that this Casey roommate posted here and used the past tense to refer to Maribel? We had, she always knew, as opposed to, we have, or she knows. And why would she ask him to move out if they have so much fun together? My prayers are with the friends and family. This is very sad." However, while trying to defend himself, Casey fueled the suspicion by providing more irrelevant and personal information. He would go on to say that Maribel was his only family and a beneficiary of $250,000 for his life insurance, which she knew, causing a user to scold him, saying, "This is not an accusal, just a personal observation. My condolences firsthand, Casey. You need to be more careful about the kind of content you are posting, where you are posting it, and the audience that you are dealing with. In this case, it would be very personal information posted on the internet to complete strangers who do not readily know the entirety of the story and have no obligation to come to your defense. I hate to point this out, but the stuff you write makes you susceptible to doubt. I don't see a reason for posting up information about life insurance and bank account beneficiaries paid upon death. She knows this, etc. Statements of only family and love for a roommate. You may be outraged that I am pointing this out, but I'm just showing you what an uninvolved third party may think of your statements and process of posting. Rant at me if you wish. I understand the need and desire to defend your reputation, as well as your concern for your missing roommate. Just be more careful about who and how you are asking for help." His comments made many suspicious of him, and the police decided to dig deeper into his history. While searching into his history, the police discovered from his sister that he had a history of violence and was very temperamental. It was also found that he had an ongoing arrest warrant for missing his court appearances after being arrested for suspicion of driving under the influence in 2011 in Tennessee. Also, in 1986, Casey was charged with assault and battery, and in 1987 he was charged with aggravated assault. However, both charges were later dismissed. According to his sister, he had a bad temper and was a dangerous person, whom she had to get a restraining order against, following an inheritance dispute between them. With all these points, all fingers pointed to KC as the likely suspect, so they decided to put 24/7 surveillance on him, hoping he would make a mistake. Meanwhile, while the investigation was ongoing, Casey spoke to news channels, telling them how sad and depressed he had been since Maribel's disappearance, because she was, as he said, his only family and best friend, and he wanted her to return home.
Unusual thing was being next day, Friday morning, she was not here. That's unusual. That's when I called the police.
Her roommate says they gave each other space in their Rose Avenue apartment, but Casey Joy began to worry when Ramos, an Army veteran, missed class 6 days ago and her on-campus job. He says police searched their home for hours, taking Ramos's laptop and bed sheets, all after he invited investigators inside.
And voluntarily, they want a DNA sample. They took a picture of my body. They will search the house without a search warrant. I'll give them a permission to do it. Go ahead, go forward. She's my only family I have. She's my best friend, and I need her to come back. That's all.
While monitoring his activities, the surveillance team found out that Casey did not have access to the internet at his apartment, so he usually went to Orange Library, where he used their laptop for his research. So one day they followed him and monitored his online activities. During one of his numerous visits to the library, Casey searched for Does the cell phone have to be turned on to track its location? He also searched for the probability of finding a missing person, and then searched for how long it takes for a body to decay. On the 16th of May 2013, when he visited the library and logged onto one of the laptops, he noticed that Maribel's sister, Lucero, had planned an awareness walk that evening at Peters Canyon. While Casey looked at the address of where the vigil would be held, police noticed that Casey switched his map view to satellite and then zoomed in on a remote tree at Modjeska Canyon before immediately deleting his history. The police knew this was exactly the evidence they were waiting for and knew that this was something vital, so they set out to search the area Casey had focused on. Starting from the remote tree Casey had viewed, they searched the areas close to the Modjeska Canyon. However, 30 minutes into the search, one of the diggers felt his shovel hit something buried underneath, and they later dug up a human body. Forensic identified the body as a female, and not long afterwards, they delivered the devastating news that the deceased victim was indeed Maribel Ramos. But not only was the victim Maribel, but her body had been so horribly and brutally mutilated that an autopsy could not determine the cause of her death. But one thing was clear, and they knew exactly who had done this, and so they immediately set out to arrest Casey Joy on suspicion of her murder. At around 11 p.m. on the 17th of May, the police arrived at Maribel's apartment, where they found Casey Joy attempting to flee through the windows. He was immediately arrested and charged with 1 felony count of murder. On the 8th of July 2014, at Santa Ana Courthouse in California, Casey Joy was charged in court for his involvement in the murder of Maribel Ramos. The trial spanned from the 8th of July until the 29th, when he was eventually convicted. The court heard how Maribel had met 55-year-old Casey Joy online through Craigslist. They learned how Maribel had taken in Casey Joy as a friend and had introduced him to friends and family, and how things started going south when Casey confessed his feelings to her. They heard the recording of the 911 call Maribel made on the 21st of April 2013, where she sounded frightened and felt unsafe with Casey after she had asked him to move out for failing to pay his rent. Prosecutor Simmons added that he must have done something to Maribel to make her afraid, saying, "He did something to her that night that caused her to panic. I don't know what it was, but he did something that caused her great fear." The prosecutor also pointed out to the court that Maribel's body was found after surveillance was put on Casey Joy. They showed a video of Casey searching for sensitive topics that could imply he had committed the murder. He searched for how long it takes for a body to decay, and he also zoomed in on a remote spot on his Google Maps, which led the authorities to Santiago Canyon Road, where Maribel's body was buried. Prosecutor Scott Simmons argued that Casey Joy was motivated to kill Maribel due to his unrequited love for her, saying Maribel was his life, and the opportunity for him to be with the love of his life was coming to an end. Prosecutor Simmons highlighted to the jury how Casey was in love with Maribel and was willing to go to any length to get to her. And when she asked him to move out, when he couldn't pay the rent, he had decided to kill her. He added that Casey had cuts and scratches on his body when he was arrested, which could have been the result from a possible struggle with Maribel. The defense, on the other hand, countered his argument, with defense attorney Adam Vinning telling the court that the authorities could not prove that Maribel had died due to murder. He claimed that she could have died in her sleep, drowned, or been killed by one of her online lovers, and Casey Joy had only improperly disposed of her body. Vinning further stated that the internet search Casey Joy had made on the 16th of May couldn't prove beyond reasonable doubt that he had anything to do with her death. But Prosecutor Simmons fought back by telling the jury that the internet search proved he knew where the body was. The defense also told the jury that Maribel's death was a mystery, as the autopsy couldn't prove how she had died due to the horrifying condition of her body. Hence, the prosecution had insufficient evidence proving that Casey had murdered her. Casey Joy, however, maintained his innocence throughout the trial, telling the court how he had fond memories of Maribel and cared for her.
I miss Maribel more than anyone. I think about it. I've been here about 440 days in the jail. Think about it almost every day.
But finally, on the 29th of July 2014, shortly after 1:30 p.m, the trial judge delivered the verdict, sentencing 55-year-old Casey Joy to 15 years to life in prison after a unanimous vote from the jury, which found him guilty of second-degree murder. As the verdict was read out, Casey Joy was emotionless and only blinked. He never spoke nor showed any form of remorse. The murder of Maribel left many devastated and the community in shock. Her family and friends had candlelight vigils and memorials on her behalf. Her school, CSU Fullerton, gave a speech in her honor. In a statement, Fullerton President Mildred Garcia said, "Maribel was a beloved student and military veteran who was actively engaged here on our campus and in the community. She was a wonderful role model for our students, faculty and staff, and we honor her for her past service to our country as an airborne paratrooper in the Army and her commitments to her education." Her funeral was held on the 1st of June 2013 at 1:30 p.m. at Calvary Church in Santa Ana. It was a private memorial Sunday service that left both friends and family extremely devastated. However, following the verdict, Maribel's family was finally at peace, knowing her killer had been convicted, although they were unhappy that his sentence was minimal, as they believed he deserved life in prison after brutally murdering their beloved sister and aunt.
Mr. Joy needs to be put away for life. He is an evil man and a coward that should never be forgiven.
Her family also requested an apology from Casey, who had been adamant about giving any, as he continuously claims to be innocent, saying,
Family wants me to apologize, which I cannot apologize for something I haven't done. Maybe someday truth will come up. Maybe I'll just die inside the prison.
Casey also wrote countless letters to the judge asking for a retrial and declaring his innocence, but his request was rejected, and as of today, he is apparently writing a book titled Suspect, Guilty Until Proven Innocent. Maribel's family would go on to create awareness about her death by making a Netflix documentary titled Worst Roommate Ever. In this documentary, they told her story to the world, teaching valuable lessons about the needs to be careful and perform due diligence before choosing a roommate. Casey Joy is currently imprisoned at the Correctional Training Facility in California and is, however, said to be eligible for parole in December of this year after only serving 9 years. I do hope the parole board will take this case incredibly seriously, and hopefully Casey Joy will not be released anytime soon. Maribel was someone with a heart full of love and kindness. She dreamed of a future where she could build a family and a home, but that future was tragically cut short by someone she trusted, cared for and called a friend. It's difficult to comprehend the pain and suffering Maribel must have endured in her final moments. She was murdered for simply being herself, for wanting to pursue her own romantic dreams and choose her own path in life. Her death was a cruel and senseless act of violence, and my heart goes out to her family, whom this cruel act of jealousy and wickedness has left them without a sister, aunt and daughter. May her soul rest in peace, and I do hope that one day Casey's conscience and guilt kicks in and he confesses to the crime, and he lets Maribel's family know the truth into what happened that fateful day.